This is the Venue RX podcast, and I'm your host, Jonathan Aymin. I'm here with my guest, AJ Bruno, and today we're going to talk about sales.
You're listening to the Venue RX podcast, where we provide your weekly prescription of tips, tools, tactics, and inspiration to start or grow your wedding and events business. Follow along with our listeners as we delve into the exciting world of events. And make sure you check out our YouTube channel and social pages, where you can engage with our show host and guests. No matter if you're brand new to the business of weddings or an event pro, our mix of mindset and mechanics will challenge and inspire you. And now, without further ado, our host, Jonathan Aymin.
You're listening to the Venue RX podcast, episode number 7. What's up, everyone? My name is Jonathan, and I'm your host for the Venue RX podcast. We are talking today to AJ Bruno. Thanks for being on the show.
Jonathan, really glad to be here, especially since we're like the same person in some instances. We have so much overlap.
We are the same person in a lot of different ways. I can't wait to dive into the story. Let's get to it. All right, AJ. So I want to jump right in here to your story. I'm really excited to talk to you. Like we said, there's a lot of similarities between our stories. Can you just kind of introduce our guests to who you are, what you do? You know, you can just segue right from there to taking us back. I would love to hear about you in college, just as kind of like going back, an origin story. I love that. Talk to us.
It's been 12 years since I've been in school, but no one asked that piece of it. So that's awesome, because I think there's a lot that goes through in college and how you end up in sales as well. So AJ Bruno, founder, CEO of QuotaPath. QuotaPath is a sales commission tracking platform. The why behind it is that I've run sales teams, and we'll get into my sales background here in a second. But my team has just always struggled to tie incentives and goals and what they're going to make. I mean, you get into sales to make money, and sometimes it's just really tough to calculate that. Use a napkin, use a spreadsheet to calculate it. And a lot of times companies don't pay out their sales reps correctly. So that's also an issue. So we wanted to empower the sales team in a little way. So we built a tool that we launched 2 years ago, have a few thousand reps that are using it, a few hundred companies, well, actually a few thousand companies that use it, but we launched our paid product this past summer, a few hundred companies that are using that admin functionality. But my story, so college, wow, I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'll go one up this. The real origin story is that I was actually a childhood actor growing up. I did a lot of stage. Yeah, there we go. Cool. I did a lot of stage, Shakespeare. I had a lot of friends growing up. My dad actually owned a video production studio where he did a lot of videography, weddings. Actually, got used to that and started to get into theater. And Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh is a pretty well known. Went and did a couple shows there. Did a Pittsburgh Public Theater. Was actually in Midsummer Night's Dream. I played the role of Puck, and I know plenty of monologues from that still. But I was in the show with Gillian Jacobs. Gillian is known for the show Community, and she was in the show Love in Netflix. So I grew up and was childhood friends with her. Moved to Philadelphia when I was 15. Met my wife in high school, so we started dating in high school. Went to school at Penn State and studied economics, finance, and Italian at Penn State. So I had a mix of everything. That was 4 years. I was an okay student. I was probably a 3.2, 3.3. Did pretty well, but didn't really know what I wanted to do. Had some cool internships with NFL Films that got me into some more of the production stuff, but ultimately knew I wanted to start a company at some point in my career. And I had an uncle that was really successful in business. And as I was graduating, I was like, I don't want to start a company. What am I going to do? What should I do? And he's like, look, if you get into sales, and I was like, sales? What are you talking about sales? Sales, you're going to get a total MBA in how a company is run. Mm-hmm. Bottom line revenue all the way through. You do that, and that will give you that like jump start to figure out what you want to do if you want to own a business. I said, okay. So that was kind of like how I started.
That's insane, AJ, because my dad went to Penn State, got an electrical engineering degree. He was accepted at Carnegie Mellon, actually, but chose to go to Penn State. Grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
He told you this. I started the conversation. Say, like, we're going to the person. Do you know where your dad was from in Pittsburgh?
A township called...
all townships. I was from Moon Township. Your dad's not from Moon, I hope.
No, it starts with an S. No, Shelby Township is where my grandparents are from in Michigan.
In Pennsylvania, everything was incorporated when they first set this up. So they're all townships.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. That's cool.
I lived out by the airport. My dad's a pilot and my mom's a flight attendant. And so they flew for US Air. That's why we ended up in Philadelphia. But actually, total side, we can get into this. I'm also a pilot, 1,000-hour commercial pilot. And I own a airplane today that I kind of fly around the country for fun. from
Wow. I saw that and I want to talk to you about that also because I feel like a common theme that I've heard of from entrepreneurs, from incredible entrepreneurs who have, made incredible companies, they have some connection to flying, whether that's like these lucid flying dreams or they're pilots.
Usually it's skydiving. They're like all the super risk takers, and they're like jumping out of planes. Mine is, it is that. And there's a ton of connection to flying and aviation and entrepreneurship and even sales that we can get into in this conversation. But yeah, there is a tie-in for sure.
Awesome. Okay. So you go to school for economics. It was your uncle, correct?
Yeah, my uncle was in New Jersey. He wasn't in tech at all. It was a real estate. He was successful in real estate. So I looked for jobs out of school, and I was in Philadelphia. My wife at that time, fiance, was in New York. She was doing a year of service. I guess I kind of wanted to maybe venture out, but we didn't really know what we were doing, and our families were still in Philadelphia. So I looked for jobs here. So I found a company called Meltwater, and this company is a Norwegian company by descent, but they had an office in San Francisco. Well, they had 52 offices around the globe. So they're headquartered in San Francisco. They just went public actually this year, interestingly.
Wow.
And I went and interviewed, and it was this kind of crazy interview where it was a group interview, and all these Swedes and Norwegian executives with their skinny ties came into the room. And I was 21. I didn't know shit about sales. So I was like just confused what was going on. And they were basically like, hey, we're going to teach you everything. Actually, they didn't say teach. They said learn. We're going to learn you everything about sales. I'm like, learn me? What does that even mean? There's a little translation issue. But I absolutely was like, oh, this is a cool company. I want to go join. Everyone was 23. All the executives were like, I think the median age was 25 of the company. It was 1,000-person company.
Wow.
So culturally, it was an interesting experience. But I joined the Philadelphia office in 2008. Of course, recession and 2008. And everyone was like, oh, it's going to be impossible to do sales at that point. There's obviously some parallels that people are talking about with 2020. But I didn't know anything. And I was just like, I'll just pick up the phone and call. So it was a cold call to close job. We didn't have any tools. There was nothing about sales efficiency. It was like, here's a phone book. Call these 1,000 director of communications and close deals. And we did. So for my first 3 months, I just like worked 100 hours a week. It seemed like prospecting, doing everything. And they didn't use Salesforce. They built their own CRM. So I was getting used to all of these different terms of like, what's a lead? What's a prospect? What's an opportunity? They didn't use the word opportunity. I think they said deal. All these terms I wasn't familiar with. And somehow for the first 3 months was able to be pretty successful just by working really, really hard. Went from there and eventually became a sales manager and then the director of the Philly office. And then 2011, opportunity to open an office in San Diego.
Oh, wow. So, and I have a question about that really quick. Did you have a lot of the people that you joined that company with, other sales reps, quit, or was the attrition rate not too bad?
No, it was 1 out of every 3 left. In fact, that's a great question because when I joined, one person left. It was a 12-person office. One person left for the first 6 months. And that was looking around like, what is going on? Is this how sales normally is? And what I found was there were just a lot of people, especially it was their first job out of college. They didn't really know what sales was. So they just like jumped into it. And with the cold call, it was a really tough job and you're working 100 hours. It was one of those things where I didn't know if I was going to stay and stick around. And there's something that we'll get into in a little bit where I struggled for that summer of 2008. I really, really, really struggled.
Well, and I was going to ask you and this is a sidebar, maybe we can get into it later, but my question is, why do you think that salespeople quit? Or why do you think there's such a high attrition rate? Is it the hard work or is there something else?
If you think about the sales career, it was someone like me who didn't really know what they wanted to get into. And were like, I did okay in school. I was never going to be an engineer. And I was never going to be like this high finance person. And so I was really looking for something that was just going to be, pushing me in a direction, but also I hadn't done a ton during college where I felt like super motivated. So someone like myself, if you take a lot of those and jumpstart them, they're just going to naturally, people are going to churn out because they just don't fit that boiler room-esque. I remember watching the boiler room scenes my first week. And I was like, is this really what it is? Like, this is what this is. And I took the train in. I lived with my parents. I didn't have much money. It was a $40,000 base salary, maybe $30,000 variable, like 70,000 on target earnings job. So I was living with my parents up north, taking the train. It was an hour and a half commute each way. I remember like one morning just walking in and I was like, I do not want to go into work. I do not want to do this. Like, I'm just going to quit. I'm going to quit. I'm going to quit. I'm going to quit. And then you walk in, you're like, ugh, can't quit. I gotta keep going. So, but a lot of people hit that wall, and there was a 50-50 shot that I was going to be one of those 1 of 3 that will churn out in the organization for sure.
Okay, so you get the opportunity to open up a field office in San Diego, and is that was your first time coming to San Diego?
I had been there with my friends previously, but my wife had never been there at all. I remember going with my friends, be like, okay, I'm going to move here. It's like I loved everything about the energy and the momentum, and it just felt like the right thing to do. I also knew everyone that I told that I was moving to San Diego. I was like, oh, that's awesome. Like, it's great. So once I kind of like tricked myself. I do a lot of fake it before you make it, which is sales. Like, I'm moving to San Diego. Great. Good job, AJ. I'm like, yes, we're going to go do that. So that's kind of what happened as well. But pretty much, I mean, we'd only spent a couple days, or I'd only spent a couple days there before moving there full time.
Okay. So you open, and that was the Meltwater.
That was with Meltwater. Yeah. So they had the role of managing director position, which was the director of sales. And so I got to open an office, and that was cool because it was like the next step to entrepreneurship, which was opening an office, but having the backing of a big company. I think the company was doing about $70 million in revenue at that point. And so I didn't feel like it was going to fail. And I spent 6 months in San Francisco doing all the recruitment, getting everything set up, and then moved full time to North County in San Diego for first year. We were in San Marcos, and then we moved to Mission Hills for a better commute. And we just wanted a slightly closer to the city lifestyle.
So really quick, and I just have to ask this, what year was that?
2010, 2011, and 2012, we were in San Diego. We moved from North County to Mission Hills 2011.
2011. Okay. So I lived in some condos with my wife when we first got married, right near that Albertsons in San Alejo.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's a pizza joint that we went there, or is right there.
I missed you by a year.
Total side story. I heard our first like 2 weeks once we moved in, I had heard that Californians like couldn't drive in the rain. And I was like, what are you talking about? That's silly. One day it rained pretty hard in the morning. And so I was driving down that hill, and you remember that fountain in the middle of it?
Yeah.
There was a truck overturned in the fountain because of the rain. It's like, whoa, I guess this is serious. People really can't drive in the rain here. Yeah.
And it probably wasn't even raining very hard. It was probably just a drizzle.
No, yeah, exactly.
Wasn't bad.
Wasn't that bad.
Oh boy. Well, if it helps at all, I'm originally from Texas, but I didn't start driving until I came to California. So I don't know where that puts me on the scale of driving.
Where in Texas are you from?
The Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Okay. My brother lives in Dallas now. And of course, I spent 6 years in Austin. And
so we're going to get to that sidebar, because not only do my wife and I love Austin, we're thinking of moving there. We just went there so much. I mean, I don't even know. No one's probably going to care podcast wise, any of our guests listening right now.
Or we get everyone to move to Austin after this conversation. That's what's going to happen.
Exactly. What point did you start having that itch? Because you said you were in the path, you were with Meltwater, moving towards, it was a little bit more of an intrapreneurial position.
Yeah.
At what point, and was there kind of this clear moment of like, I want to do this by myself?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I have as clear of a moment as it gets. So the catalyst was 2012. What are we going to do? We're going to move back to the East Coast to be with family. At the same time at Meltwater, I had a boss that didn't really get along with. I just didn't see eye to eye. And you always hear that people quit bosses, not companies. I think there's absolutely some truth to that. In this case, it was, again, a catalyst. It wasn't the determining factor, but it was a piece of it. But this boss and this manager did one thing that was absolutely fundamentally changed the trajectory of my entire life. He took us to go see Tony Robbins. And I didn't know who Tony Robbins was. And this was like in San Jose in summer of, 2012. And I went, I'm like, well, this guy's from Shallow Hal. He's from like that movie with Jack Black and Gwyneth Paltrow. Like, I knew that. He's like in that movie. So I went without any expectations. Like, you know what? I've got a lot going on. I've got so much stress. I'm just like exhausted of this thing. Let me just like buy into whatever this guy is selling and see what happens. And boy, was I bought in. So if you don't know who Tony Robbins is, he's a presence. He's like a 6'8" dude. He gets in the news for lots of different reasons, for plenty of different things, whether people get burned because they walk on coals, their bottom of their feet get burned. We did do that. So it's called Unleash the Power Within. And 4 days, he speaks on stage for 3 of those 4 days for 12 hours straight. Doesn't go to the bathroom, doesn't even drink water. He's just like a machine. But what he does is he contextualizes things that are going on in your life. Even though there's 8,000 people, he'll just hit you hard with like limiting beliefs. Like, I don't have enough money. I'm not old enough. I don't have the education. Whatever it is at that moment that you're going through, you're like, that you think you can't do something, he just blasts through that. Like, just totally blast through that. And that hit me hard, really hard. And I had always wanted to start a company. I was like, yeah, I should go do this. So I set down some goals. Like at the end of it, I set some goals. I was like, I'm going to go build a company. I'm going to go buy an airplane within 3 years. And those 2 things are going to be like my fundamental truth. So I was all hopped up on Kool-Aid when I left this thing. I told everyone, again, fake it before you make it. I'm going to go buy an airplane. I'm going to go start a company. And everyone's like, all right, AJ, go do that.
So Tony Robbins was a catalyst then to you kind of, was it believing in yourself, or was it just saying, I'm going to take that step because I have to, because you always had dreamed about it?
I think part of it was that it is believing in yourself, and it's the story that you tell yourself all the time, and that making that story true. But like my constant state was pretty negative prior to that, and just sort of kind of reframing and reshaping how I was thinking about it. I knew I was going to start a company no matter what, but that was helpful in that way and giving me direction to do it. So really was a fundamental thing. Like all these things were coming together to do that. And that hit. So I made that comment, or like, I'm going to go do this. And I had a ton of support. My mom and my grandmother, not so much. They're like, AJ, you have a kid on the way. You're in California. You're moving back. What are you doing? No, wait until you get a house or you have stability, quote unquote stability. And I was like, well, let me show you 2020. Let's find stability. Let's see the future of stability. And the truth is, no one ever has stability. And you know this just as well as I do. Like, I was $70,000 in debt. My wife and I had a car from college, from Penn State. Penn State, even though it was in-state, was pretty expensive. And at 27 years old, I'm like, what am I doing? We were driving with one car that was like this Murano that was like broken down. We're like, no. We're just going to go do this. The world is our oyster. And that was the start of it.
Wow. That's incredible. So, and that you're not starting QuotaPath here. You're starting TrendKite, correct?
That's right. Yeah. 2012, my first company was TrendKite, and it was in the same space as Meltwater. So Meltwater is a media monitoring tool, just like a clipping service where you could find out like Google News alerts on steroids is what we used to say. TrendKite was more about attribution and BI dashboards, so PR attribution. It's like kind of took the mousetrap and built one layer on top of that. And we moved back summer 2012. My co-founder, who I knew from Meltwater, had moved to San Diego, and we just like talked all the time. We're like, well, let's go start it in an accelerator, a business accelerator. So we ended up in Austin because we went down there in the beginning of 2013, January, February, March, down there, and that was Dreamit Ventures. It was basically like a MBA on startups in 3 months. You do what you would do in 3 months, or in 12 months, in 3 months, with mentorship and just like understanding all of the startup lingo and everything about it, incorporation, all the legal, financing, venture raising, everything was covered in that quickly. And so I left my pregnant wife, who was 8 months pregnant, in Philadelphia in a 1-bedroom in Royersford, Pennsylvania. We were paying $800 a month for. I went down there, and my co-founder and I were just like basically shoestring budget. There's Car2Go was really big in Austin at the time. And if you're not familiar with Car2Go, it was like the Uber and Lyft before that, but you actually rented the car. It was these smart cars. Yep. And so 3 of us would jam pack into this smart car, and there's like pictures of my co-founder in the back. He's a pretty big dude, and he's like in the back of one with all 3 of us smashed into one.
That's an amazing story. I love that.
Yeah. So I actually, during the program, so 1 month down there, and then I flew back for the birth of my daughter, made that by a few hours. Thankfully, got back in time.
Wow. You made her birth by a few hours?
I think it was, maybe it's a little bit of revisionist history, but it was closer than I would have liked. So got back and was here for 2 weeks, flew back, then did demo day, and then we raised $1.2 million. So the company went from napkin idea to raising venture 1.2 million in 4 months.
Wow.
So it was quick. And then we moved, but with the venture, with the term sheet, that we had to move the company to Austin. And I just told my wife, hey, we're moving from San Diego to Philly. There's no way in hell I'm going to end up in Austin. Like, we're going to end up back in Philly with family. And I had to go back to her like, what do you think about Austin for a couple of years? So,
did she like the idea? Had she been to Texas at that point?
My cousin was from Austin. I had another cousin, actually he's from Dallas, and then he was in Austin. They both went to UT. And he was like, when I was moving to San Diego, he's like, you should move to Austin. I'm like, nah, it's not really interesting. We're going to San Diego. I'm like, well, Austin and San Diego are like sister cities. And they're not. I think they're very vastly different cities, by the way.
Yeah.
But we stopped on the way to San Diego. We had stopped and hung out with my cousin then. So she knew the city a little bit, but that was kind of quick turnaround. But she was like, you know what, 2 to 3 years, we'll go down there. So on year 5, like, hey, we've been in Austin for 5 years. You said 2 to 3 years. I'm taking the kids and we're going back home. She's been very supportive, and like that was fine. It was kind of the thing. We with TrendKite though. So TrendKite was in the PR attribution space. I ran the sales team 0 to 25 million, the growth team. And it was like total chaos. So it was in a good way. We went from 0 to 100 employees, 100 headcount in sales in like 2-3 years. It was just a really, really quick, fast turnaround. So onboarding and recruiting and just like a really good culture alignment was important.
Your whole path with TrendKite was accelerated, it seems like, from the incubator to raising the funds. I mean, you did that in 4 months. I mean, typically it takes people quite a bit longer than that. It maybe triple the time?
I think
double the time?
Yeah, it's new business and monthly sales cycles, because Meltwater's monthly, like urgency was just always drilled into my head of like always, always, always. So during the accelerator, I hired 5 interns. So we didn't pay anything. We didn't have a product. And I had sales interns cold calling people to sell TrendKite at that point.
Wow.
And we were at this place called the Capital Factory, which is like the mecca of startups and the inroads. And it was a bunch of like techies that are there. So it's a pretty quiet environment. People are working on the products. And here I come in with 5 like boisterous sales reps. And we had to like build this, they called it the TrendKite fort. We had to build this like piece of it where people like weren't disturbed from it. But I did all the sales methodology training, objection handling, the competitive market, value propositions, window of opportunity, storytelling. Basically, I created this like boot camp for sales that I just got people up and running for pretty quickly. So yeah, 0 to 25 million in 4 years. We sold the company within 6 years for 225 million. And so like, it was very, very, very fast. From start to finish.
AJ, I want to get into that story about TrendKite and your really dive into that sales business side of things, being acquired and some of that, because I'm fascinated about that. But I'm going to pitch you and the guests right now, you to come on my other podcast that I do called the Jono Show, which is more directly related to entrepreneurship as a whole rather than weddings and events. And I want to pitch. So if you're listening to this, you should check out that show. Obviously, we should talk about that later, AJ. But I want to shift at this point because you have created a product right now. I need to officially sign up for, but I've gone through the demos and some of the training.
Wait, are you pitching me, or am I going to pitch you and get you to sign on this show?
You know what? Maybe that's going to happen at the end of the show. But no, I think that you feel. I believe that you've created with QuotaPath something that the wedding and events industry is in dramatic need for. And if you're listening to this right now and you are in the wedding and event space, you know many people in this space are solopreneurs. Many people are running more of a, dare I say, mom and pop shop, more casual business. You know, they were people that maybe in 2011, 12, 13 left corporate jobs because of their passion for floral design or photography, or they had a great eye for video and they'd always messed around with it. They loved food and they wanted to have a catering company. We have a very close friend and one of our business folks who literally came from a big marketing firm in Phoenix and ended up starting his own food truck business. You know, so there's a lot of that happening. When that happens, you get folks who maybe aren't applying the same sales methodology and some of the words that you've been using to their business because they're almost treating it like a hobby that's paying them.
Yeah.
Created a job for themselves. So I think that the product that you've created with QuotaPath is so impactful. And I want to dive into that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah.
So when you think about sales, how important is it for any company of any size to have clearly defined sales metrics? I mean, tell us, what are some of the things that companies must have for success?
I mean, to answer your question, they're a requirement. It's not, if you're going to create a business that has some level of sales to it, and whether you're paying commission or you're not paying commission, you need to really clearly define what your goals are. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, I look at companies, and I've done plenty of consulting with it. And I think the owners and operators, especially if they haven't had a sales background, a traditional sales background, I mean, they're all doing their own sales, they're all pitching their own business, but they don't think about it as commission or think about it as like, oh, they're thinking about, these are clients, these are customers. And you're always selling yourself. You're always just kind of having that natural conversation. But if you don't have a process behind it, and if you don't have a methodology and an intent behind it, when you build a team, it could be just one or two people, that all falls flat. And so let me tell a quick story about this, because this actually talks to some of where I realized this. And it was very early on in my career. And I'm thankful for this experience, even though it hurt at the time. I joined a team my first year out of college with a manager that was one of the best, if not the top sales rep in 1,000-person company. She was an amazing seller. She was really, really good. And she's closed deals with Thermo Fisher, and I had never even heard of Thermo Fisher. Like that was like looking at her and watching her and just run this. I was just in awe. But imagine someone coming right out of school and having to learn from the best. You would think that that's like absolutely the best case scenario. And for me, it was the worst case scenario. Because she sold at a level that I just aspired to do. And if I emulated her, it just kind of all fell apart. And it did. So then I switched to a different person who was selling to the IPO market. And I didn't know what IPO meant. I had no idea. She was talking to these technology companies, and she was talking about Series C and liquidity and PE firms. I didn't know any of that. I didn't understand that. And so I failed again. So when you think about A to Z, you have like this just line that you want to draw, and that line can go crooked and all over the place for it. And so eventually I landed on a team with someone else, and she treated me like a toddler, like a 5-year-old. Basically said, AJ, you're going to repeat everything I say, and I'm just going to like spoon feed you all along the way. And that is exactly what I needed. And so when I think about sales teams and how they get started and exist today, that is the most important thing, is to make sure you create an aligned sales methodology with clear-cut goals and metrics all along the way. Those metrics can be anything. In a traditional sales team, I think about 3 buckets: results, objectives, activities. And as an owner, and doesn't matter, solopreneur, or even a bigger company with a giant board, you tend to think about the results. What am I going to get as the output? What was my share of wallet, or how many new customers and new logos did I land? How many weddings did I book for next summer? And the challenge with that is when you focus on that, it kind of focuses on the wrong thing with your team. So the analogy I always use is if my daughter came home with a B on a report card in math, I can't snap my fingers and turn that into an A. It's not how the world works. She got that B, that was her result. But if I back up to, well, what was her objective? She had a weekly quiz in math. She got an A on that weekly quiz. She'll probably get an A at the end of the semester on her report card. So that's the objective. Well, how do I work with her to get that A on that weekly quiz? Well, if I study with her for 30 minutes every single night, that activity will drive the objective that will drive the results. Sales is 100% the same exact way. So you might not think that cold calls or emails or whatever the right activity. There's some level of activity that is the right thing for your organization. And you should start there. Outline what those are. Use the data from your previous experience. Like, okay, I had 100 weddings that I booked last year. How did I book those? What was the customer journey? How did that happen? So that I can then impart that on a team that I might hire. Now for QuotaPath, and I haven't mentioned QuotaPath yet, we sit here and say, yes, those are the right things. But ultimately, You also need to empower your team and think about their career and their goals. Maybe they want to go off and start their own business as well. So how do you get them to do that? Money is only a part of the equation there. You actually want to make sure they understand that process and they understand that methodology. And so our tool, I mentioned at the beginning, commission tracking is one piece of it, but it actually outlines how you tie that from that initial stage all the way to the close. And more importantly, what does the salesperson actually get at the end of the day if they close that deal?
Mm-hmm. I think that this is so important because specifically I'm thinking about venues, and this podcast is the Venue RX. We're talking to venues, we're talking to catering companies. These are organizations with sales teams. These are organizations with venue managers or venue sales folks, catering companies with, salespeople who are going out and getting business. And I think that that's so important because, like you said in the beginning, I don't think many employees leave companies as much as they leave managers, they leave improper business structures. And so if you're listening to this and you just all heard AJ say, you've got to set up a system correctly around tracking some of those metrics. And they can be taken from your own experience, but you've got to do that. And that's what I think QuotaPath does so well. You facilitate that piece, which in our organization right now is the missing piece for the venues that we're working on. And that's why when I found this tool, I was like, this is so cool. Because a lot of commission trackers are parts of other, CRMs or whatever else. And I already have pieces there.
Yeah, and the CRM part of it, if that's also, it just feels like even the word or it's not even an acronym, CRM, just feels like, I don't even want to deal with that. That seems so heavy. And the other part of it is, so we wanted to create something that was just like UI friendly, user interface friendly, that anyone could jump on and get started. We have comp plan templates, and it's just easy and lightweight for you because you're absolutely right that it's like, okay, I understand that, but don't I need a CRM? I have all these spreadsheets and an email marketing tool. And should I take everything from SurveyMonkey and now move it to this? And what's specific to venues? And like, what are other venues doing as well? And I think that that's 100% it, Jonathan, where it's like, there's so much out there. It's just like, whoa, simplify your world, bring it into something that makes this into bite-sized, and then you can build on it when things are going well. Don't try to take down everything at one time in this world.
And a lot of times, depending on the type of business, whether it's a floral company, DJ, whatever, as you're trying to scale it, a lot of times there's not necessarily the cash flow to dump a ton of money into getting a product like Salesforce or something like that, that's going to be such a meaty product. And I know those products do try to offer bits of it so that they can kind of graduate you as you go along. But again, you used a great word, heavy. It feels very heavy. And for a lot of the entrepreneurs, solopreneurs in this space who are looking to expand their businesses, it's very hard to do. And so you want to just take a tool like QuotaPath. And it's crazy, guys. Like AJ's totally not, I just met AJ like last week through his team on a sales call, but this has been really relieving to me because our team can take this tool, just stick it onto what the tools we're currently using, Honeybook and some of these other tools, to help our team produce results and grow our company. And now more than ever with COVID and everything that's happening, we have to have that.
Yeah, and the COVID piece has been interesting as well because our company, we were founded in 2018. So the like jumping back to rewinding the clock a little bit from the TrendKite to QuotaPath story, we just moved back to Philadelphia. I was commuting back and forth between Austin and Philly every single week. That was just exhausting to run a sales team of 120 people.
Were you flying at this point? Are you in your plane?
I was. I didn't fly. I actually, this is going to sound ridiculous, but there were lots of trips that I did commercial because I actually liked getting work done on the commercial flight. When you're flying, you're managing systems and you're talking to air traffic control. You're making sure the engines sound okay. You're not just flying a plane. You're doing a ton of other things. Navigation's a big part of this. So you don't sit in the cockpit and do work. Sometimes I do, especially in long trips like the Oklahoma, Mississippi part of the flight. I'll listen to podcasts sometimes, but I very much am just like in the zone of flying an airplane. But I was doing that every single week and I was just exhausted of doing this. So when the letter of intent to buy TrendKite came in, that was a good time for me to exit stage left and work on this. And I thought about it and I was like, TrendKite was a good tool. We had all of these customers, but the lesson learned there was building for one end user versus many. And I looked at tools that were out there like a Slack or a Dropbox, many that your customers have probably, or your people that are listening to this have used in the past that are like built for it. You can just try it. It's like freemium. And I said, okay, if we can build something that's just a tool for an individual rep to use for free, we could create kind of a bottom-up groundswell in this application. And it's just, again, easy to use, softening those edges. So that's what really became interesting. And the next challenge for me was on the business model side of like, everything here has been enterprise and very heavy, tough to get into. How do I make this lightweight and start to add integrations? Didn't matter if it was QuickBooks or Honeybook or whatever it was. I wanted to make sure that they were able to like just create and insert their systems into it. And so we're still a little early on that. We launched Salesforce, HubSpot, CRM this month. And then the integrations are going to start to flywheel through based on what our customers are. We'll have QuickBooks and Xero and Intact and other accounting systems. We'll go up to the ERP on the NetSuite side, but we'll definitely work to figure out what are the best integration points for our customers as well. So if you're listening, you're like, well, I have this weird CRM. Feel free to get in contact with me and I'll absolutely add it to the queue of what we want to add for our integrations.
Yeah. And I feel like systems like this, and maybe this is even something we can talk about later, but I think this whole industry needs some help in this way, because a lot of the systems that are being used are back of the napkin type stuff, spreadsheets, Google Drive stuff. And what ends up happening is inevitably commission payouts are delayed, or we're not exactly sure, or who did that. The tracking is all off. And that was one of the big things for me as I'm looking to scale what we're doing. And especially as I think about 2021, 2022, a lot of pent up demand because people have been canceling their events. For those of us who are going to be left standing after this whole thing is resolved in some way, we have got to make sure that we're properly growing our teams. And I think this time is more important than ever to kind of do some of that underground work. So I think it's cool that we're talking right now. And I'm hopeful that people are able to check out QuotaPath and use it. And because you do have the freemium model, right?
Yeah. You can go in and sign up. And to that point, I mean, venues, I hope they figure out ways to like quadruple book weddings all at the same time when this whole thing comes roaring back. And by the way, I say that with both empathy, but also sympathy. My wife owns a childcare center, a daycare.
Yeah.
And so we were in Pennsylvania, we were shut down for 3 months. And then this fall has been a miserable experience because we were only allowed to have 50% occupancy in it. So we have to lose money. And so it's kind of similar where whether it's wedding venues, travel, whatever it is, where it's like if you make it to the other side of this, there's going to be so much opportunity as well. And I know this as well. So we're also looking at that clock and thinking about it. But at the same time, in the remote work standpoint, you mentioned paying out your team correctly. One of our clients is an accounting firm, and she's like, AJ, the only emergency in accounting is payroll. You don't pay your team correctly, you're gonna get frustration. And that's very true. But it's also one of the reasons QuotaPath exists is had a top seller at TrendKite. There was like a kind of a deal that he got signed, but then it wasn't a clawback because then they re-signed and repapered the deal because of a term. But he had missed a cutoff for a spiff, and a spiff is just like a one-time opportunity within a given time frame to make extra dollars. He had missed it, and my VP of finance wasn't going to pay him. And I was like, "What? Are you kidding me?" And the rep, his name was Jake. Jake was like, "Are you kidding me, AJ? I'm going to leave the company. This is actually a material difference." And I was like, "I get it. I'm going to push hard to fight that." So sometimes as the founder, as the sales leader, I didn't even have the decision-making capability. Thankfully, I got it through and he stayed and he crushed it. He sold $1 million the next year. And it's like finance folks just have this view on cash flow on short term without really thinking of the sales team. So I always really loved from the founder level being on the board of a 400 person company, not huge, but a board that was a real board. And thinking about the science and the motivation and behavior of sales, but then also being able to draw that back in and having one-on-ones with my team and knowing everyone. And I ran one-on-ones with the entire team once a quarter. I took a 2-week sprint and spent an hour with every single person on the team. I really enjoyed that piece of it, but it was being able to mix those two in my next company, which is QuotaPath, that I really, really enjoy.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Well, I want to shift to the two segments that we have here at the end. This could easily be a Joe Rogan style 2-hour, 3-hour podcast. There's so much that we could cover here, but I want to head into the segment of the show called Left at the Altar. This segment is basically about mistakes that were made or maybe different failures. And I know people don't like the word failure. They don't like the word mistake, but let's face it, mistakes and failures happen and they're good things. I don't think that, saying that you made a mistake is necessarily a bad thing. And I know, I'm going to maybe get some flack from that, but I think that's good. The faster you can make mistakes, the faster you can have those failures and learning experiences mean that you get somewhere a lot quicker than if you're constantly trying to either psych yourself out that it wasn't a failure or try to just avoid failure altogether. AJ, could you share with us some experiences you had that maybe were learning experiences or just times where you're just like, man, I can't believe I did that, and maybe a solution that you can share which would inspire our guests or our audience?
Inspire me as well, Anya. So the first 6 months into sales were really, really interesting. The first 3 months, I just worked harder than anyone in the company, probably. I was about to get engaged, so I had a wedding ring as a goal set for it. So I just blew it out of the water in terms of activity, in terms of what I got. And I hit all of my quotas. I hit my ramp and was able to get that wedding ring that was humble at the time, but it meant a lot to me and certainly my wife as well. And so those first 3 months were fantastic. The next 3 months, I already alluded to when I talked about sales managers and I completely fell apart. I sold $5,000 in new business out of a $75,000 target during that time.
Wow.
And as you can imagine, anyone that's in sales, ooh, that's not good. It wasn't. I was a mess. Confidence was at an all-time low, wasn't getting it. And I came home and told my wife, I'm like, sales is not for me. It's not the right career for me. And I went in and talked to my boss and was like, I'm leaving. I'm quitting. I'm going to put in my notice. And he looked at me and remember, we had just left six or seven people, one person a month had been leaving the company. And he knew that he's like, AJ, you're working so hard. Look, there's a summer kickoff that's coming up for the US organization, probably 150 folks in Arizona. Go to that. You're going to hear the CEO talk. So let's see what that looks like. I'm like, all right, fine. So I went, I drank the Kool-Aid. I'm a very impressionable person, by the way. People can just tell me what to do, I guess. And I was like, okay, I'm going to re-buy into this. And I just re-buckled down and every single day. And by the end of the year, I was the top seller in the entire company.
Wow.
And I had rededicated myself. So I failed fast during those 3 months, but at the same time, it was a gut check. And that was all within 6 months of starting sales. So wow. It was, yeah.
So yeah, the huge, and I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that because it's so easy. And 6 months when you're in it feels like a long time.
Yes. Very long time.
Forever, and
the monthly sales cycle. It can wear on you.
Yeah. And for us, whether that's a podcast, whether that is, new business that we're trying to get, whether that's been this whole year, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months feels like an eternity. But if you can realize what it is in the scope of everything, and like you did, buckle down, that's an incredible story of you kind of triumphing over really kind of poor performance. And it sounds like a really low confidence that kind of poor performance led to you. You probably had to get over that a little bit, correct?
Oh, for sure. And I'm lucky in that I had a great support system. I mentioned my wife, but everyone around me on it. And my manager, I really am lucky I had that manager. We're very good friends. He went to work for Google for 10 years and now he's a VP of sales at a company called Main Street. And we talk every week and there's a mentorship. He uses QuotaPath, of course. But I'm really fortunate that happened. You mentioned failures. I think that we all look at failures as something, if we're successful, something that we have to do. Mm-hmm. We have to fail fast and we have to learn from them really, really quickly. Otherwise, we're not going to have long-term successes. So it was very fortunate, but it was also a very trying time where I was very low in just how I felt about the world.
Cool. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. The next step of this is the daily prescriptions. So do you have, for anyone listening out there, the audience here is mainly people who are in the wedding and events industry, although I'm sure there's going to be others as well. But for folks who are running small businesses that are maybe looking to scale, or even right now, they're not doing any work and they're looking to next year and trying to understand, how can we book more business? How can we attract more clients? What advice would you have from them for a sales perspective? Keeping in mind also that the wedding and events industry is interesting because often we sell something that doesn't occur until much later.
Yeah. Write down your goals. It's the easiest, the best thing I've ever done. And this was a Tony Robbins thing is I wrote down 3-year goals, 1-year goals. And then every single day I write down my goals, and I use a method called RPM, rapid planning method, to do my goals. It has made a massive difference. And that doesn't matter if you're in sales, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're owner, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. Start your day, write down what you want to do, have somewhere where you have your weekly goals, your monthly. We have monthly company targets, quarterly OKRs, and just yearly planning. And then for me, I write down 3 personal goals and 3 business goals that I look at all the time, every single year. It doesn't matter what year it is, even if it's 2020, and think about how I'm going to achieve those. That plane, I said 3 years. It was 3 years and 2 months, and I bought the plane. I'll give myself a little bit of leeway because we had twins along the way as well in that. So
how many kids do you have now?
I have 3. I have 3 daughters.
Wow. Good for you, man. Congrats. That's awesome.
Thanks. But yeah, goal setting and writing down your goals cannot recommend more for something to do.
What was that method again you said?
It's RPM, rapid planning method.
Okay.
And the idea is like you have a million different things going on in your life, and maybe you want to join a gym. But when you think about it, it's just like there's so much you would have to do to join a gym that most people just procrastinate and never do it. So it just like takes that and say, okay, well, if you're going to join a gym, what are like the 10 things that you need to do? And just doing 1 or 2 of those things a day to get to joining a gym. And then basically not taking on or biting on more than 3 big rocks every day, big rocks for the day anyway, to take on.
I love it. I love it. Well, this episode wouldn't be complete without our honeymoon phase. And I think a wonderful honeymoon phase to this episode would be for everyone to go check out QuotaPath. And AJ, could you kind of give the audience some links or some direction if they want to connect up with you personally or want to check out the QuotaPath product? Where can they go? Where should they be headed?
Yeah, I mean, QuotaPath.com for sure. There's comp plan consults under resources. So if you're thinking about your planning for 2021, and you're like, AJ, I don't want to be sold something. I'm like, okay, I want to buy something. Well, I get that. But what you really should start doing is do a consult with one of our teams. Graham Collins, my head of growth, fantastic at just helping planning. You're like, I'm going to have a massive amount of bookings, wedding bookings in the summer. I know this. And like you said, Jonathan, like I got a plan for the future. How do I think about incentivizing and goals? Our team's here to help with that. There's no cost to that. And if in the meantime you want to check out QuotaPath, you can do that as well. And if you want to talk to me personally, I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. I've been a little busy end of the year, but AJ Bruno 3 on LinkedIn, you can find me. If you shoot me a personal note about this episode, I will definitely respond. So happy to do it. So there as well.
Awesome. Very cool, AJ. Well, hey, I want to close out. What are some resources, maybe podcasts? You mentioned you listen to podcasts occasionally. Are you a reader? What would be some things that you would recommend to our audience for maybe some Tony Robbins stuff even? What would you recommend for inspiration, business growth resources?
Yeah. If it's sales specific, the 2 that I really like are Challenger Sale and Never Split the Difference.
It's called Challenger Sale? Yeah,
Challenger Sales. That's required reading for anyone that joins any sales team that I'm ever on. And it's fantastic. There's a lot of different frameworks that people have, Sandler training, spin selling, but Challenger Sales is basically rooted in the data of like what the top sellers look like. and how do you coach yourself into that role. Some more leisure, fun, dramatic reading. I'm looking at The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which is Ben Horowitz's book, which is great. It's just the horror stories of starting startups in your own company, applicable to any entrepreneur for sure. And then Daring Greatly, Brene Brown. I really like, that's one of my go-to. And I think about how to be a more compassionate leader. And that was one book that really, really spoke to me, especially some of the things I did in sales with like shaming, for example, and how to actually give feedback. I really think Brene Brown does a great job in that book. And she has a podcast that's really well followed as well.
And she's out of Austin, correct?
Geez, I don't know where she is these days. I feel like so many of these people have moved to Austin.
Yeah.
As well. What's his name moved to someone moved to Austin in the podcast world.
Ben Shapiro maybe, or Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan, yeah, exactly. Joe Rogan moved to Austin, and then everyone's like, well, let's just move to Austin. So that's where everyone is now. It's the place to be for sure.
I was going to say, I'm literally holding 2 of her books right here.
There we go.
AJ, it's been a pleasure. I've really appreciated having you on, and I feel like this episode is packed full of value. So I'm looking forward to the team chopping it all up and giving everyone a real look inside what you're doing with QuotaPath. But your story is really inspiring. So thank you.
Looks like I'm going to be doing a part 2. So we've got a follow-up coming that we can dive deeper into some of this as well.
We absolutely do. All right. Well, if you're listening to this, check us out on YouTube. If you're watching us on YouTube, check us out on podcasts when you're driving or doing other things where you shouldn't be looking at screens. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you in the next episode.